Welcome, everyone. My name is John Verhaeven, and I'm the director of the Power Plant. Welcome to the third and last of our Power Talks in the context of the Toronto International Art Fair. So for the 9th year running, Art Toronto has commissioned the Power Plant to present a series of lectures in the context of the art fair. And we're very pleased to present this year a lineup of speakers. So on the first night, we had BC Silva from CCA Lagos in Nigeria. And on our second Power Talk, we had Saskia Boss, who's the Dean of Visual Arts at Cooper Union in New York. And for our final talk this afternoon, I'm very pleased to welcome Haro Cumbusyan, who's coming to us from Zurich via Istanbul, or Istanbul via Zurich. Anyways, he's here, and we're so pleased to be able to welcome him for you this year. So many people have helped to make Power Talk a successful ongoing program. First, the Power Plant would like to thank our partners here at Art Toronto, mainly Linnell Ribenschuk and Susanna Rosenstock. Thank you both for your work over the 9 years and for always being open to all of the program that we try to carve out in order to bring new voices within the scope of contemporary art internationally right here in Toronto. The gallery is also indebted to our government funders, mainly the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council. As always, I wish to thank our partners at Harbourfront Centre, and I'm pleased to let you know that all our public programs at the Power Plant are generously supported by our primary educational sponsor, CIBC. So thank you, CIBC, for believing in the value of education and creating bridges between our exhibition and public program, all of this in order to inform and develop our many audiences. The Power Plant, for those of you who might not know the Power Plant, is 5 minutes away from here. You just take Simcoe all the way to the end, you can't miss it, and there's a smokestack and it's written The Power Plant. And we invite you to visit us today or as you are here in Toronto. And when you come to visit us, you'll be able to see the exhibition of Pedro Cabrita-Reis, titled 14 Paintings, The Preacher, and a Broken Line, and also an exhibition of Julia Dalt, titled Color Me Bad, and also Sheila Keeley, Notes on Obsolescence. Admission is always free at the Power Plant, thanks to BMO Financial Group. And now I would like to hand things over to my colleague Christine Bowen, who's our Curator of Education and Public Program, who will introduce today's speaker. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Haro Cumbusyan. Haro Cumbusyan is a collector of contemporary art with a special interest in moving images. He is the founding director of Collectorspace, a nonprofit organization that brings private art collections to public view and promotes critical discussions and writing on contemporary art collecting practices. Collectorspace opened its first exhibition space in Istanbul in September 2011. He also serves on the board of directors of Proto Cinema, New York, Istanbul, and Studio Voltaire, London. We are delighted that he has traveled to Toronto to be with us today, as Gaetan mentioned, so please join me in giving a warm welcome to Haro Cumbusyan.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you all for being here on a Sunday afternoon. I'm typically on the other side of organizing these type of talks, and I know that it is not an easy job. I'm very impressed the way the Power Plant has handled this, and it was a great pleasure to be here during the first two talks. So thank you, Gaetan, thank you, Christine, and also Art Toronto to enabling such an organization. I will talk about collector space, and this is it. Actually, basically, this is it. There's nothing in the back of this space. It's showing our current exhibition with the Mgilic wall painting, just to make sure that we understand the size of this institution. It's about 20 square meters, 200 square feet, and that amount we have divided into an exhibition space in the front that faces the street, and then in the back we have an office, a library, a resource center. So it is on the smaller side, but fortunately it has a very prominent location. It is at the edge of Taksim Square in Istanbul, and Google has done an amazing job wiping out all the people from this picture, but there are typically a lot of people around here. So even though we can not fit more than 3-4 people into our space, we like to pretend that we have a much larger audience, and quite a few people pass by, and hopefully some of them look up and see what we have inside. I've brought some help with me with this presentation.
When I started, I really didn't like the word collector. But then I found a wonderful meaning. Collection comes from cumulus, CU, and lecture. So technically and etymologically, collecting is the cumulus of lessons. So suddenly I started liking the word collecting or being a collector, because that's exactly what I do. That's exactly what I had looked for in a collection. It's only a cumulus or an accumulation of lessons.
Cesar is a collector from Mexico City. He has very interesting ideas. We have tried to capture them on video. I'll hopefully share some more with you. Some of them are controversial, but that's what we try to do. We try to open up discussions around topics that sometimes are not discussed, but would help collectors in terms of charting their own way. I will not go over the objectives formally that we have at Collector Space. Instead, I'll talk about what we actually do. We have an exhibition program and an events program, and our exhibition is pretty well defined. We bring a single artwork from an international collection. The reason we have decided to go with one artwork to represent a collection is a bit strange, obviously, but we didn't want to go into making a selection from a collection, because that would put the emphasis on the curation. We wanted the emphasis to be on the artwork and the collection as a whole, and obviously bringing a whole collection into a space is in most cases not feasible. And we have made that decision actually before we landed on our space. With the current limitations that we have in our space, obviously we couldn't fit more than one work anyway. Besides this one artwork that we basically give a solo show, and we want to emphasize that collecting starts with the artwork. So let's look at the artwork first, without anything around it, and another artwork basically interfering and changing the context. We also want to jump from there to the whole collection, and the way we do it is we shoot a video in the collector's home. We want to show how they live with the artworks, how they collect, how they go about it, what motivates them. And basically it's a simulation of a private collection visit. And I personally think that those visits are very educational and also very entertaining. So we try to replicate that experience in places where people not necessarily have the opportunity to make a lot of those visits. And to complement the video and the exhibition, we have a publication that goes with the exhibition. It typically follows it, and may follow it a little bit later than the closing of the exhibition. And here we try to bring a critical view to this particular collection and the collecting style. So we commission texts to independent writers to review the collection, to go to visit the collector and give us their opinion. We understand that reviewing a collection is maybe not an idea that resonates when you first hear it. But we think that if we want to talk about responsibilities of collecting and how we can become better collectors, that reviewing process is essential, because everything else that we do very seriously, we are subject to some sort of review, and that's how we get better at what we do. So we are trying this. Obviously, we don't exactly know how to do it, but hopefully just even bringing up this issue of reviewing a private collection could have an impact. We also have an events program. We do participate in art fairs when we are invited. Typically, these are subversive interventions, but hopefully without being too cynical towards the commercial environment of an art fair. I talked about the value of private collection visits. As collectors, we don't have a school that we go to and graduate to be able to walk into a gallery and acquire some artworks. So it's basically learning by doing. And in my opinion, seeing other collections is quite helpful.
I do remember a couple of times visiting collections and being unable to imagine how people lived with them, because the collections seemed to me to be so overstuffed and so trendy for the sake of being trendy. And also visiting collections and seeing pieces that I really wanted to see, I had no idea what was in the collection, and then being surprised at the way they've been installed, because I thought it was totally inappropriate for the piece. I'd say the collection visiting that I've done has been a source of lessons and things not to do than anything else.
And I think learning from other people's mistakes is much cheaper, so I would recommend that. Now, in terms of the program, it started, as Christine said, in 2011, and it was a challenge to find the first collector to show, especially because we did not have a track record, and we were an institution with a location in Istanbul, so not every collector would agree to participate in a program like that. So we had to find somebody who is ready to take risks, wants to support small institutions, and also has an interesting enough collection for us to start and start building this track record. I visited a collection in London, an Italian collector who is based there, and I was visiting the home with a group from Tate. I entered the house, and there was this installation right at the entrance. It's a work by the Polish artist Gorzka Makuga called Madame Blavatsky, and this life-size figure dressed in all black, levitating between two chairs, is right in front of you, and that's a very striking entrance to a home. And then Valeria Napoleone, she appeared, and she's very charming and warm personality. And somebody like that, having chosen to live with a work like this, was certainly impressive. And getting to know her engagements with small institutions made us think that she would be a perfect start, and fortunately she agreed to participate in the program. And we requested this work to travel to Istanbul, and we got it. as you can imagine, putting it somewhere very close to the street where a lot of people pass by created a lot of interesting conversations. Some kids cried, they were scared, and their mom said, don't worry, it's just art. And the drivers at the taxi stand speculated that it was a woman living in the building, and their tradition was to show the corpse after they died. So they thought that maybe this was a funeral home, but it was certainly worthwhile creating some interesting discussions. The next exhibition was a little bit more opportunistic. One of our advisory board members, Mary Spirito, mentioned that a collector from the US was in town in Istanbul to do a photography residency. And a collector turning an artist is a little unusual, so I was intrigued. You see more artists becoming collectors, but so this was more of a unique situation. And when I learned about the project that he was doing in New York, I was blown away because it was so close to what we were thinking about. This was David Ho, and he has a space in New York called 601 Art Space that he opens up to artists to use as a resource, basically. And he also allows them to use his collection to come up with new ideas. In this case, he commissioned a curatorial intervention, and the artists, Kevin and Jennifer McCoy, curated an exhibition based on the collection. They picked 12 artworks from the collection, but instead of bringing the artworks into the space, they streamed live images from wherever those artworks were. Some of them in various homes of the collector, some of them in storage, and they intended to show the artworks in their natural habitats and reveal the private lives of these artworks. And that was very close to the things that we were talking about in terms of making private things public and blurring those lines between private space and public space. So we jumped in, being a small institution, has those advantages that you can be nimble, and we suggested that we do a simultaneous exhibition in New York and Istanbul. So we streamed the images live again to Istanbul. Obviously, the way we did it was very different from the installation in New York, and part of it you saw in the background when David was talking about private collection visits. There we had projections on a big wall. We used iPads, and because of the time difference, when it was night in New York, it was morning in Istanbul. So the experience of this exhibition was very different. But we really liked the idea that we had an artwork. This is a new media artwork, basically, and there's always the question of uniqueness and can you show the same work at the same time in two different places, and what regulates that, and so on and so forth. So it took us in many different directions in terms of the discussions. I'll let David talk a little bit about the exhibition so that you get a sense of the ideas.
There, my wife is about to go to the gym. Oh, this is real time. It's 1 frame per second. And in a minute this elevator door will open and she'll get in. I don't think she knows that she's being filmed, but I don't think it would upset her. This is a piece by Louise Lawler. It's a paperweight. It's actually about 4 inches in diameter. You can see if you look at size of the paperclip, how small it actually is. But because of the way it shows up on camera and the light gets inside it, you actually feel like you're in the space of the paperweight is created around this scene from MoMA. This is a Jeff Wall. This is also in the warehouse. It's half in and half out of its crate.
Let's also hear, how he uses his collecting in his artistic practice.
My collection, it's not goal-oriented. I'm not building a collection as an object in itself. I'm not thinking about the collection as something that I want to have a particular shape or a particular size or a particular notoriety or a particular ultimate destination. It's rather almost like a record of where my own thoughts and interests in art are at any given moment. And in almost every case, it's because the idea, the concept or the thought behind the piece is what captivated me and made me think, why didn't I think of that? Through the process of collecting, I was able to spend a lot of time visiting artists, top artists in their studios, people that, you'd have an impossible time trying to take a class with or even get a chance to ask questions if you weren't a collector. And because of that, I learned a tremendous amount by digging into the artists who had made things that I wished I'd made myself. I could go back and get the backstory of how they'd made it, why they'd made it, how they thought about it, how they thought about things in general, how did their process work, what did their studio look like, what kind of equipment did they have, how many assistants did they have, all of the kind of mundanities of making art, which are really very, very important. This is a photograph by Thomas Struth, which is in my living room. You can see reflected in the glass on the front of it, the view out the window of the living room. And during the day, you can see the light change, and occasionally people walk across in front of it. Here is it's a photograph by Gabriel Orozco of his office in Mexico, which he came back to after he'd been away for several months and discovered in this state of luxuriant overgrowth by the invasion from the outside. This last one here is in my house. It's at my house in the country. We're looking out the window, which at the moment seems to be clouded by some condensation or rain. But this is a sculpture by Richard Serra that's in the backyard of that house.
As hopefully you could see, Jennifer and Kevin curated this show very carefully, thinking about display on top of the the artworks that they chose to show. Next, we wanted to do a video exhibition. And we contacted the Kremlix, the first name that comes to mind about video collections, and they graciously agreed to participate. The problem was, what work do you choose from a vast collection like that? And that question is often one of the more interesting parts of our engagements with the collector, because it makes them think really hard, which work is the appropriate work to send. In this, Kremlik's current interest is video from China, but we chose an earlier work, The Way Things Go by Fischler and Weiss, because it was the work that inspired them to collect video, and probably it inspired a few other people to do the same, and we were hoping that it would continue on that route in Istanbul. It was, obviously challenging to show video in a space like that without turning it into a black box. We didn't want to lose the connection with the street, so we ran the video 24/7, and I believe it was much more impactful at night. when people were walking by. And in Istanbul, Istanbul is like New York, it doesn't sleep, so it was quite visible at off hours. So after the first 3 exhibitions, we had done an installation, a new media piece, and a video. We thought it was time to show a painting so that people would realize that we were an art space. So we tried to find an interesting collection that focused on painting. I visited Marty and Rebecca Eisenberg in Scottsdale, New York, and when you enter their home, it's, you know, there are so many paintings on all the walls that it's really overwhelming. You know, couldn't you know, find a better place to pick something, I guess. And Marty is so eloquent in expressing his views, and you know, I thought I could listen to him for hours. So we invited them. They accepted. Again, the issue was, you know, which work do you choose? They have so many masterpieces in their collection.
In the early 90s, when we came into this, we came in at a perfect time. It was a time when a whole group of terrific young dealers all came into Soho and really changed the face of the art world. In very quick succession, you had Gavin Brown, you had Anton Kern, you had Tanya Ben Akhtar, you had Andrea Rosen. At the same time, when there were these great galleries open in the 90s, great young curators were really entering the museum world also. And we hooked up with them, and their opinions meant a lot to us. I felt that these are people that I wanted to really support their programs, and they were showing very interesting things. And I developed a very strong relationship with these galleries. It's through those people and being part of a dialogue, that's how we decided who were the right artists. It's definitely a New York-centric collection. And I think that's the way it should be. If we lived in Los Angeles, Rebecca and I, it would be a Los Angeles-based collection, no question about it. We've gone to Berlin, and we met Berlin collectors who really concentrate and build their collections and support their local galleries. That's the way it should be.
Supporting the local system is something that it's a theme that comes back often when we talk to collectors, and I think it's important to emphasize in our program as well. So we try to give that some space in our videos. After looking at a painting for 6 weeks, we wanted to do something different, and you know, performance was one of the hot topics. So we wanted to find a performative work. Another advisory board member, Daphne Ayas, suggested that we look into the work of Ryan Mcnamara, and through his gallery we contacted the collectors who had a piece by him. It was the archive of his life until his teenage years, basically. And it was in the collection of Phil and Shelley Aarons, whom I knew from New York. And we brought them over to Istanbul.
We're both involved institutionally. Shelley's the secretary of the board of the New Museum. I'm on the board of PS1, Creative Time, and Printed Matter. So we spend a remarkable amount of our time on supporting the institutions that are supporting young artists doing unusual and new things. And so that's really what we love.
At Collector Space, we typically don't want to tell people, this is what you need to do, or this what you shouldn't do. We just try to show them examples. We don't even pass judgment on whether the examples are good or bad. But there are some themes that we do think is important, and one is supporting the institutions locally and maybe not so locally as well. And most of our collectors mention this, that they are involved. I visited the power plant this morning, and it's a fantastic institution with a great leadership and curatorial team, and I hope that everybody in Toronto is a member already, and if not, they should become a member. In my opinion, that's what makes a collector a better collector in both senses of the word. The quality of the collection probably improves through the relationships with the institutions, and also the role of the collector is, again, to help artists and institutions to produce and show artwork. So basically, they would be fulfilling their responsibility in that way.
We really approach it as something that's not just about objects, but very much about the people who are creating those objects. We're very interested in learning about the artists.
Their process. Honestly, we're much more interested in the process than the objects.
Great to see you. How are you?
Nice to see you. I'm sorry.
We were big admirers of the artist who's here, Ryan.
See, I'm so excited.
We'd seen a lot of different things that he'd done.
Performances.
Mostly performance-based. And the acquisition of performance is a difficult concept for people to wrap their arms around. So his dealer and Ryan came up with the idea to preserve his archive in the hands of someone who would have the interest and resources to keep it and value it.
So Ryan came to Istanbul, and for a weekend he talked about his life, his teenage years, using the archive, whoever walked into the gallery, depending on how much time they had. And we really enjoyed that experience of having a live performance in our space. So the next collector set we invited became these psychiatrists who have been dealing with ephemeral work for a long time. The French couple, Marc and José Jean Solin from Marseille. And when we visited their home, Marc actually reenacted a Tino Segal piece. Unfortunately, we could not document it on our video, but they acquired the work in 2002, and that gives you an idea of what kind of collector they are. We borrowed a work by a French artist who lives in New York, Julien Bismuth, and he collaborated with a mime performer to come up with this piece. We invited the mime as well. He came and did a few of the performances himself and trained another mime that was local. And we had these performances for 6 weeks, every day that we were open, and it created an interesting engagement with the public. A lot of entertainment, again, for the taxi drivers. Then we had a little interruption when the Gezi protests happened. This wasn't from any notable collection, some street artist doing it. It was quite organic, and we really liked it. But the municipality thought that our windows needed to be clean, so they did it for us. And after that, we brought something that was quite a bit quieter, and this work was Dominique Gonzalez Forster's The Savage Detectives, based on Bolaño's novel. And it came from Cesar Cervantes' collection, whom we heard at the beginning of my talk.
This is Abraham Cruz Villegas. This is, I don't know how many years ago, but all the remains he had in his studio before leaving for a residency in France. He had nothing to do with them, so he painted them with this green and pink, which are the colors of movement and the colors of samba, the most important samba school in Rio de Janeiro. And this is only a third of the whole work. The other two parts are with friends. We bought it together. One part is in London and the other part is in Lisbon. The readings and meanings and all that, they are always ongoing. There are many works in the collection that I haven't got intellectually, that I haven't found intellectually, or that I haven't understood. And I like that. I think that's what is important. Not one day I'll be walking around here, even though the work had been with me for many years now, and I will realize or start getting into the work.
I think that what he said there is very interesting to me. A lot of art advisors, even people who have written books on collecting, tell collectors buy what you like. I think that's a little bit simplistic. Buying works that challenge you, that disturb you, that change your perception of even what you like is, I think, quite a bit more interesting. So Cesar actually put that quite well in terms of his collecting practice.
This is, I don't know, this is my favorite room, I will say. Basically, all my days start here and end up here.
Well, he says that the library is his favorite room. His house is amazing in terms of the artworks that are all over, but it shows his commitment to books. And same with Phil.
I've always been very interested in books and fascinated by books as an alternative vehicle for the display of an artist's practice. I'm interested in books about artists. I'm interested in exhibition catalogs of artists' exhibitions. I'm interested in the history of exhibitions themselves. So I have a breadth of interest that results in thousands and thousands of books.
So since collectors put so much emphasis on books, we thought we would bring a artist book collection, and we didn't have to look far because there's a very good one in Istanbul, and that was our first collector who was local that we invited into our program. Actually, an artist, in my opinion, one of the most significant ones from the region, Banu Cennetoğlu, who has this artist book collection that she has made public. It can be visited. The work that we chose was Corrections and Clarifications by Anita Dibianca, American artist based in Berlin. And this is an ongoing project, something that she has been doing since 2001. Basically, she looks in a particular market during a particular time frame and collects all the corrections and clarifications that have appeared in the newspapers and puts them in an edited version in this newspaper. And looking at all those corrections in one place actually sees you so many patterns. Some real, some imaginary, but it's a very interesting way of looking at what's happening in a particular market. After this exhibition, actually we got into publishing business, of newspaper business, and together with BAS that Banu leads, we published this paper that looks into the Turkish newspapers, and it just came out a few weeks ago. It was one of the more fun projects that we have done, and this is Banu talking about her books. And finally, we come to our current exhibition with Andy Stillpass from Cincinnati. Mind-blowing collection. This work is by Liam Gillick, as I mentioned earlier. His collection is based on commissioning artworks. And to me, that thought was very interesting in terms of a different approach, so we wanted to include him in the program. But when I visited his home, I realized that it was much more than just a commissioning practice, because he started this in the mid-90s, and he worked with artists who were also friends, a lot of them part of the relational aesthetics movement, and they came and they stayed with Andy, and they created work in response to the other works that existed, and layer by layer it became a curated exhibition over a period of 10 years, maybe more than that, which you wouldn't be able to create in any other setting. So to me, the whole house is a huge artwork. And even though Andy is quite camera shy, we had him talk about some of his experiences.
So I was having dinner with Andrea Zattel one night, and she had just made a small trailer that she went across country. And so I had the idea, well, why don't do a trailer and it'll be our guest house? But make it very luxurious, so if people come and they stay, it's like staying on the Orient Express. So she came up with this design. I invited Martin to Cincinnati. He said, I'm going to do this piece for you as a gift. Crumpled piece of paper in every room in the house. When he was leaving, he said, I didn't finish it, get enough balls for you yet. And he'd only done like 7. He said, so I'll deputize you, I'll teach you how to make one and do it yourself. But you just go like this. And then you open it all the way. And then you've got a Martin Creed ball. So we had one right here, and Rob Pruitt was visiting, and we had this party and had these black napkins. So Rob did this. Yeah, so it's like a panda bear.
And you have so many of these, and it's really fascinating. Please, the video will be on our website in the next couple days. So if you have a chance, I suggest that you watch. And
a piece of art just strikes you. It hits a nerve somehow. And it's hard to compare something like a Martin Creed crumpled piece of paper on a pedestal to a painting like this. And yet we're passionate about both. I mean, and it couldn't be two more different objects than you can imagine. Why both pieces speak to us, I really don't know why that is. But we really feel closely connected with both.
And there are, the paths cross when we visit different collectors. In many cases, they agree on certain approaches. In other cases, they don't. But it's interesting to look at the different references and try to see patterns. Maybe like the corrections and clarifications. That intrigues me quite a bit. We can finish here, or we can continue, but I don't want to indulge myself too much. We can look at a few more clips.
Everybody's been so kind and working with, and they go out of their way and do more than you expect. In the end, I enjoy the process as much, many times more than the object. Oh.
Yeah, the collectors do have this privilege of access. And I think when they use that, they get the most out of it. It's not the financial side. It's that engagement of thinking together with the artists. Well, this might be a little bit of a downer, but since this is the end, let's listen to this.
I would say in between my office and my house, 90% of the collection is on display. And for this stage, there are only 5 works that might be arriving sometime this year. And they have a place in the house already. But when I got to this point that I needed to store a work or move a work in order to make room for a new one, this questioning about when to stop started seriously on my mind. I will not want to have artworks in storage. That's nothing. Art that is not display is not art. Collections tend not to have a finish or an end. And I think as the books or as the movies, it's very important to know when to finish. And not only when to stop, because you see collectors that need to stop because of economic reasons, but this is different. This is to know when to stop and why to stop. And I tend to feel closer to that. I tend to feel that it's good time to say I'm finished. I have this serious intention of not accumulating just for the pleasure or for the sake of accumulating.
Interesting thought, no? Yes, on that note, if there are any.
The most obvious question, can you tell us where your funding comes from?
Is that obvious?
Very obvious.
We are a small operation, and we have a full-time staff of 1 who is who does the job of a dozen, probably. Özge Soy, who is a Bard curatorial studies graduate. But we try to do everything on a small scale. When it comes to collecting, there are enough glitzy and very big things. So ours are pretty small scale. We fund it ourselves. Obviously, it would be great if we could include more funding, and we are a non-profit organization that is tax exempt in the US, but frankly, we don't want to go to corporations or to galleries for funding, because what we do requires quite a bit of care in terms of not crossing ethical lines. We do not engage in any trade. We do not get any commissions on trades that we might have facilitated. So far, that's how it's going.
So you are your own patron?
That is correct.
Thank you. I have a question about the Jen Solon collection with the mimes, and I was wondering if that's dependent on reenactment specifically. How does that work?
Well, the work comes with a physical object as well, and it was displayed. If I can go back, this one. It's a mime performance in 4 acts, and these frames actually show the individual images of what the mime is doing. So you have a storyboard. The agreement between the artist and the collectors is such that the script will be made available for other performances when the collectors request such a performance. So far, the original mime is still performing, so we had the privilege of having him involved. He said that context and the space that we had impacted the way he performed and the way he taught the next mime how to perform. So they actually spent quite a bit of time working out the space when they first arrived, which, not knowing how mime works was a surprise to me. I also didn't know that there was a fairly big mime community in Istanbul and a mime school, and they came to visit us. And such interactions with the communities that we have no idea makes this project really, really interesting for me. Did I answer your question? So every time it has a different flavor based on where it is being performed and what limitations there are, but there is a script, and it is actually based on dealing with art. And in some cases it's hanging an artwork. In other cases it's making it with hand gestures, and or looking at art in a busy art fair with people on their phones and pushing strollers. But the art is never there. It's just in our imagination in every act. So.
Hi, Haro. My question, what do you collect?
My interest is in moving image. So it's video, film, animation, or other media that incorporate the element of time, because we have decided, and this was a while ago, that the most scarce resource that we had was time. The biggest luxury was time, and we got interested in artworks that make use of that notion. Obviously, that was a long time ago, and we have moved beyond it. But I looked at a lot of artworks that are in the margins. When going through an art fair, when somebody says, "Is this art?" or "Why is this art?" that's when I get interested. Currently, I'm looking into works that are between documentary and film and video. But yeah, as I said, I mean, the boundaries are where my interests lie.
And then, can you tell us how you started collecting? What prompted you to become interested in collecting yourself specifically?
Well, my wife and I, we were living in New York, and when you are in New York, you have all the resources. The only thing that you don't have is time. But if you want to become a collector, you have all the institutions, you have private collections to visit, you have all the galleries, and so we were members of pretty much all the museums, and I was interested in art for a long time. I was also acquiring artworks from an early age, but not in a way of collecting artworks. And at some point we were part of the Young Acquisition Committee at the Guggenheim, and I give them a lot of credit, because that's where that's more of a formal training in collecting, if you like, since there's a lack of that otherwise. But that's where we saw what the curators were interested in, also, and what kind of thought process they were going through, because they were basically suggesting artworks to be acquired for the collection, and they were coming up with justifications for it, the reasons why it should belong in the collection. And there we started thinking more seriously about creating a collection, and we came up with the idea of acquiring moving image, because there were a lot of very important works being created, but established collectors were not looking at them that much. So that gave us an opening, being fairly new in that area and having limited resources. We thought that we could acquire more important works when we concentrated in an area that was a little bit underserved by collectors, and we continued on that path.
My question is, how did you decide that Istanbul was the right place for a collector's space?
Istanbul is a very vibrant city. It has been like that for a while. When I left Istanbul 25 years ago, it wasn't like that. My generation couldn't wait to get out of there. So we landed in the US, and I was very happy there. But in the 2000s, a lot of our friends started going back because there was more of a stable environment, and the economy kept doing well for an extended period. So the new wealth generation always helps the contemporary art market. Starting the mid 2000s, new privately funded initiatives started popping up, one after the other. A lot of galleries. Istanbul kind of became like Berlin, where a lot of creative people, artists, designers from all over the world chose to move to Istanbul. It's not like the corporation sending people over to some third world country. It's people making that decision, which meant that there was something interesting happening there, and by them coming and being included in the community, made the place even more interesting. So it was an upward spiral. They have a limited capacity of showing their collections. There is no real public institution that existed that where people could go and talk about these subjects and learn. So we thought it was an interesting place to have as a test case. Me being from Istanbul and having a network there and speaking the language helped, obviously, with that decision. But we always said that this would be our first location, and we could do it, in many different places, in many emerging art centers. We never really thought that New York or London or Toronto would need a collector space, but there are other places that could be interesting. It turns out that for now, at least, I'm happy with the location that we have, and I don't have the ambition to take over the world. On the other hand, some of the things that we do is being followed internationally. Even though I think that the role of the institutions to a significant proportion is to serve the local market, and it's very difficult to transport this experience of what we do in our space somewhere else over the web or by just writing about it. But some of the other engagements that we have I think are easy enough to follow online or getting our publications and so on and so forth. So so far I think it is serving the purpose of being local, but also open enough to international audience. And thank you again for allowing me to come here and talk about this project this way. Now I have more people who know about collector space.
Are there any other questions for Haro?
Thank you.
Hey. Well, thank you, Haro. We've really enjoyed having you here and really appreciated your illuminating talk on different collecting practices and your work on bringing them to the public sphere, giving us the inspiring advice to invest in work that challenges us and changes your perceptions. So thank you very much. And thanks to our audience for joining us this afternoon. I encourage you to join us again at the Power Plant on Wednesday, November 5th, when artist Mark Bradford will speak as part of our international lecture series. So I hope to see you then. Thank you very much.